Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Thank you, Cass, and thank you to the Gay Buddhist Fellowship for asking me to speak. I feel very honored. I've been there a number of times, and to one of the retreats at Vajrayana, and I've always really had an affinity for this group. So this is a treat for me. I'd like to start by reading a koan from Hone Yamada Roshi. This is from a book he wrote of koans called The Gateless Gate. And the koan I'm going to read is called Ordinary Mind is the Way. And the case says, Joshu earnestly asked Nansen, what is the way? Nansen answered, the ordinary mind is the way. Joshu asked, should I direct myself towards it or not? Nansen said, if you try to turn towards it, you go against it. Joshu asked, if I do not turn towards it, how can I know that is the way? Nansen answered, the way does not belong to knowing or not knowing. Knowing is delusion. Not knowing is a blank consciousness. When you have really reached the true way beyond all doubt, you will find it as vast and boundless as the great empty firmament. How can it be talked about on the level of right and wrong? At these words, Joshu was suddenly enlightened. The commentary to this says, Nansen was asked a question by Joshu, and Nansen's base was shattered and melted away. He could not justify himself. Even though Joshu has come to realization, he will have to delve into it for another 30 years before he can realize it fully. And the verse says, the spring flowers, the moon in autumn, the cool breezes of summer, the winter's snow. If idle concerns do not cloud the mind, this is man's happiest season. So Yamada Roshi was Robert Aiken's teacher, who wrote Mind of Clover, which was a book on the precepts that I studied when I was studying for my Jukai, initial Jukai with Mark Lancaster. And as he talks about in this koan, he talks about the ordinary mind, and that's kind of what I want to talk about tonight, is this idea of the ordinary and the sacred, the everyday mundane and the sacred, and sort of in a framework of another Yamada Roshi quote, which says that great faith, great doubt, and great determination. These are the three conditions of Zen practice: great faith, great doubt, and great determination. One of the things that I've always liked about the Gay Buddhist Fellowship is that there are many different traditions represented here. And it brings to mind the saying that I've always heard of, there are many rivers to one ocean. And I think all of our different practices together all flow to the same place. And this it was really highlighted for me recently. I had the privilege to go to the Bhakti Fest in Joshua Tree last week. It's kind of a sacred music festival. And there's yoga and dancing and a lot of chanting the names of God. And I was really moved by this kind of dual sensation there. In the one hand, it felt very sacred. And at the same time, it was incredibly ordinary. I mean, sitting in the dirt and chanting the Hanuman Chalisa, and trying not to get sunburned, at the same time being somewhat transported into this very transcendental experience. And the heart of devotion in the center of that practice is really palpable. And what I could feel there was this desire for transcendence. And that desire for transcendence, I found to be common to most expressions of practice. And it's expressed a little differently in Zen practice. So instead of devotion, I have a practice that's rooted in doubt. At the Bhakti Fest, I kind of felt like a Zen spy in the house of devotional love. And it was really cool. But at the same time, I was aware that this is outside of sort of my wheelhouse in a way that I actually liked. I felt at home in this devotional practice of chanting the names of God. But, the cynical part of me at the same time has a hard time relating to that religious exuberance. I grew up in a very harsh faith, fundamentalist Christianity in the South, and there was no exuberance, and there was no place for me in that religion either. I got into Zen through the door of recovery. That was sort of my Dharma gate. Through 12-step recovery, when I got sober from drugs and alcohol about almost 19 years ago. 12-step, they talk about God, and basically that you need to find a higher power, if you will. And I found that faith that I grew up in didn't work for me. And someone suggested I go to the Zen Center at the meditation and recovery group. And I did, and started to get there. And there I found a place a spirituality that I could be at home in. The good piece that I got from that upbringing, that harsh as it was this idea that, we prayed every night, and that I got the idea that spirituality was important, and that it's something you did every day. So I can appreciate that, while at the same time sort of leaving the rest of it behind. For Zen, it starts, for me, just sitting alone in silence with yourself. And when you sit for periods of time like we did today, my experience of that is the sensation of time moves very differently. Sometimes I sit for half an hour and it feels like 3 weeks. Other times, particularly like today, when I know that I'm going to talk, it goes very quickly. It seems like it's been 5 minutes, and that to me is one of the definitions of sacred time. It moves differently than our ordinary time, and it's a form of transcendence. Just like the Bhakti Fest, that transcendence is different, and yet it's very similar. And it's kind of interesting also that both Zen and Bhakti have a chanting practice. In Bhakti, it's chanting the names of God. And it's this very ecstatic, and it's very devotional. In Zen, the chanting is more to settle the mind, to enter meditation, and at the same time, it's to feel part of this larger group, particularly when you're chanting with people in a temple. It's connection, and that's very similar to Bhakti. In Zen, we talk a lot about emptiness, and that emptiness, as I understand it, is empty of an essential, unchanging nature. And another way to say emptiness is interconnectedness. I don't have an unchanging, eternal soul, if you will, but what I do have is this current being that has been created and developed by my interactions with everyone I've ever interacted with, past, present, and will be in the future. They talk about the web of Indra, which is every one of us is reflected back on every other one of us. And it talks about this intimate connection between us. And it's a different way of experiencing that interconnectedness of the bhakti practice. And I found that both of these practices, the Zen and the Bhakti, are deeply rooted in the idea of Sangha, and ways of developing Sangha. So I want to go back for just a second and talk a little bit more about this Yamada Roshi quote that I talked about: great faith, great doubt, and great determination. I've been practicing with this a lot over the last year, particularly with the idea of great doubt. And then I'd actually written this talk, and then a couple of days ago read an article by Ken McLeod in Tricycle magazine, where he said, devotion, whether to a tradition, a practice, a teacher, or an idea, is the fuel for faith. And faith and devotion don't come easily to me. A lot of it is, I'm kind of cynical by nature. Part of it is I have a scientific, I have scientific training in my work. But also, I came from this spiritual tradition that on the one hand talked about love, and on the other hand was deeply fundamentally homophobic. And I became cynical, as an early child. So, what I was taught was to have belief. There's one true way. Your job is to follow it. Your job is not to think. Your job is not to question it. The job is to obey, learn it, and obey it. And McLeod talks about belief. He says it's a closed system in which everything is explained. The mystery of life is dismissed. New ideas, perspectives, and approaches to life cannot enter, and certain questions can never be asked. And he compares that to faith, which is an openness and a willingness to receive whatever arises, to embrace sensation, feeling, thought, and allow our experiences to challenge our assumptions. There's no fundamental or eternal truths, and some things cannot be explained. They can only be experienced. The willingness to open to whatever arises is what he calls faith. So this great faith that Yamada Roshi talked about, in my mind, it's a great willingness to engage in this process. And you see that faith in Bhakti, chanting the names of God, and you also see it in a room full of Zen meditators, people that are any meditators, people that are showing up and are willing to engage in this process. At the same time, doubt is really important to me in this practice. It's a matter of practicing as if nothing will happen. They talk about no gaining ideas. The way this shows up for me is to be skeptical of everything, question everything, be skeptical of teachers. Everything that comes up, I put through the filter of, does this ring true for me? It's okay to question. The Buddha said, basically, don't trust me, see for yourself. Here's a set of actions. Here's a plan, try it out, see if it works. When I first started studying with my teacher, Mark Lancaster, he said, you might want to try this out for a couple of years. And if your life is not any better, maybe this isn't for you. Maybe you want to try something else. And part of this whole process of studying and going through Jukai, which is our initial lay vows, it's a matter of kind of Trungpa Rinpoche talks about being in the spiritual supermarket. And it's like, you can look at this and you can look at this and try this and try this. But when you're ready to check out, that's what Jukai is for the Zen practice. While that doubt is very healthy and essential, it's also one of the 5 hindrances. Self-doubt can be paralyzing. And, doubt appeals to me because it tells me there's no one right way. It tells me to continue practice with this, see where it goes. If it doesn't seem to be working, try something different, So the benefit of that is that I can go to Bhakti and completely give myself to the chanting. I'm drawn to these expressions of spiritual longing. I love seeing how other people are experiencing this, and this thing that we're all doing, this desire for transcendence. A lot of people in various traditions have written about faith and doubt. I'll just share a couple of these with you. One is from Barbara O'Brien. She says, faith and doubt are supposed to be opposites, but the sensei says, if we have no faith, we have no doubt. True faith requires true doubt. Without doubt, faith is not faith. Kierkegaard says that faith without doubt is simple credulity, the will to believe too readily, especially without adequate evidence, and that in doubt can faith begin. And Stephen Batchelor says, the acceptance of such doubt as basic to Buddhist practice qualifies the meaning of faith. Faith is not the equivalent of mere belief. Faith is the condition of ultimate confidence that we have the capacity to follow the path of doubt to its end. Suzuki Roshi talks about, beginner's mind and the don't know mind. These are minds that are receptive to realization. It's the mind of faith and doubt, where all the possibilities are open. And then the great determination piece, this practice, it does take effort, and it takes right effort pointed in the right direction. Suzuki Roshi says that the fruits of Buddhist practice are nothing special. He says that enlightenment is ordinary and the ordinary is sacred. He says, if you continue this simple practice every day, you will obtain some wonderful power. Before you attain it, it is something wonderful. But after you attain it, it is nothing special. And he also says, if your practice is good, you might become proud of it. What you do is good, but something more is added to it. The pride is extra. Right effort is to get rid of that something extra. So we're not trying to do anything special. What we're doing is we're finding the sacred in our everyday practice. And for me, practice is about waking up to that sacred nature of the ordinary. I see this in my work a lot, dealing with my patients and their families and their caregivers who are going through the aging process and going through the dying process, and the way that people show up for that on a day in, day out basis, whether it's giving someone a bath or helping them dress or turning them in bed or emptying a bedpan. I mean, all of these things are incredibly mundane and they're incredibly sacred. And I see that over and over. It's such a gift to me to be allowed to be a part of that process. And the challenge, and something that I forget all the time, is to find that same sacredness in the everydayness of my own aging. I turned 65 this year. I'm now qualified to be one of my patients, and it's kind of amazing, because in my mind I'm a strong 30, maybe 35 on a bad day. I'm not 65, and yet my body reminds me on a regular basis that I am. And so my challenge is to find that sacredness that I see in this aging process in the people that I work with. So kind of to circle it back around, it's like, why do we need faith? We lack evidence of the transcendent, of the otherness, but we practice anyway. Why do we need doubt? Doubt could lead us to question the need for anything other than what we already have. You already have everything you need. We all do. We don't need to strive for something more than we already have. What we have already is extraordinary, and it's very ordinary, and it's sacred. The question becomes, do we have the paradoxical faith to believe that what we have is extraordinary? And there's a dance between faith and doubt that can serve to return us to who we already are and realize that's enough. We can, we relax into the ordinary, and the ordinary is sacred. So I guess that another question then comes up: if we already have everything we need, if we are complete, why do we practice? And the best answer I can come up with for that is that we don't stay in that realization. The mind takes us here, and it takes us there, and it takes us back in the other place, and all that moving and shaking and striving leaves us with a sense of lack. And what practice does is it brings us back to that center place of wholeness, which we can't stay in. So we practice to keep coming back to the place. I've been studying the Lotus Sutra with my teacher, and it talks very much about this idea of many rivers, one ocean. The Buddha taught to different people according to their abilities to understand, and I see it here. We're all striving towards the same thing. The devotional practices of Bhakti are one river. Zen practice is another. I believe someone from the Pure Land tradition spoke recently, and that's another river. For me, it doesn't really matter what your practice is. To me, the important question is, does your practice make you a kinder, gentler being? And then, kind of to bookend this, I'd like to leave you with another koan, a very brief koan. This one's from Thich Nhat Hanh, and it's from a book called Zen Keys. And the case says, the second ancestral teacher begs Bodhidharma to pacify his mind. Bodhidharma says, show me your mind and I will pacify it for you. The second teacher replies, I have looked and looked, but I can't find it. Bodhidharma answers, your mind has been pacified. Crowned with garlands, and the commentary is, crowned with garlands, the 3-year-old child plays the drums. The 80-year-old man plays a balloon. And the verse says, if mind is not mind, who can we ask for advice? Is it possible to become a fetus again? The old monk who thinks he can calm the mind of another is just mocking everyone around him, and he doesn't even know it. So thank you all for listening to me this evening. And I look forward to hearing what your experiences are with faith, doubt, belief, your practice. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was really kind of on point for me this week. I was in the hospital with a friend who was dying, and I don't know, faith, I'm not sure where faith entered into it. It seems like faith can be kind of situational that way. It's like, oh, you reach for it in moments of crisis. And like I have a woman friend who feels like the only time she believes in the patriarchy is when she's on a plane. And so I think it's a matter of, I don't pay attention to it really until moments of crisis. So in this, and it felt like in in the room, I guess I'd like to maybe take advantage of your expertise here. And it was like I mean, it felt like people were comfortable, more or less, being calm and just, our friend was basically not, kind of lapsed out of consciousness, more or less, for the last couple of days. And I think all of us were kind of trying to be very calm and with him and express love and whatnot. But inside we were all going, ah, and then people who work in the hospital would come in and they would just act like, treat him like another person, like a real person, there was no kid gloves. And it felt like we were, maybe nobody wanted to bring up the subject of him dying and let him bring it up if he could. I'm not sure what we're supposed to do, and like what your advice might be in a situation like that. Like, should people who are visiting like introduce the subject of dying to try to get a conversation happening, or just leave it to the person who's passing to bring it up?
Yeah. One of the principles that I always refer to in that kind of a situation is that everyone is doing the best they can at all times. And a lot of us, and I've been guilty of this myself, it's that fear of doing the wrong thing has kept me from being there. Or I'll go in and because I'm uncomfortable, I leave quickly. The fact that you were there, you're doing the right thing. You're absolutely doing the right thing. And whether or not it's the right thing to do, what I have done is I don't initiate that, but I've had patients of mine ask me, am I dying? And I say, yes, you are. Mm-hmm. And then have that conversation, and I let them lead the conversation. And sometimes it's just, okay, I just want to know. And other times I can sense that there's more to be said, and then I might probe a little bit. But I think most people that are dying have an idea that they are. And I don't initiate that conversation myself.
Thank you.
Yeah. Or you can use the hands up feature if you'd like, or raise your hand in the room, or just start talking.
Hi, thanks for your talk. I have a children little book that has like 100 little talks or little reflections, and I read one every night. And I've been doing it for a few years, and I always see something different or hear something different. But one thing she talks about a lot is being curious, not judging what comes up, but just looking at it and saying, oh, yeah, that's interesting. I wonder what that's about. Could you say something about maybe the difference between doubt and curiosity?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I would say that the mind that is closed to doubt is probably closed to curiosity. I think I think that desire to understand or be open to new experiences, I think those both come from the same place. When I'm in a place of doubt, it opens up curiosity. Okay, if this I'm questioning this, so what are the other options? What else could it be? So yeah, I like that. I like that. That definition of faith as being open to what happens, I think, is what Pema Chodron is talking about. Just there's a story I read recently about someone a woman asked about, what is, what is, how do I practice? And they said, well, just go sit sit in a chair in the middle of a room and just sit there quietly and see who shows up. And that to me is faith, because you're open to whoever does show up. And there's a curiosity to there. The postscript to this story is this woman thought he was being literal and came back the next day and complained that I sat there for hours and nobody showed up. So I think we have to be careful about how literal we are with things.
Did I understand correctly when you said that it is like devotion for you is being available to faith? Is that could you just recap what your sense of what devotion, where devotion fits in?
Into my practice,
Yeah.
it doesn't much, frankly. And that's what contrasted with the devotion that I saw in Bhakti, because there's an emotionalism that I don't feel in my practice. And for me, doubt is what takes its place.
Uh-huh.
Doubt is what keeps me engaged. Yeah, I don't see that in at least in my Zen practice, I don't see a lot of it. A lot of devotion, other than and it's not emotive and it's not expressive, other than a devotion to this practice, to continue to come back to the mat. So I guess there is an element of devotion there. And I do feel a very, very strong affinity, although I don't think, in the sort of, from what I understand of the guru traditions and in the Tibetan tradition, there's this devotion towards one's teacher or one's guru. I don't feel that quite as strongly, and yet my heart connection to my teacher is incredibly strong, incredibly strong. I just don't feel it as emotional as it looks to me from the outside that other people are in other traditions. I changed teachers recently, which was a really, really hard decision for me. That the teacher that ordained me moved to Seattle and kind of did this long distance thing and the Zoom and the phone. And I went up there for a few times. And after a while, I realized that without that FaceTime, the heart time just wasn't there to the degree that I needed it. And so I've started working with a new teacher recently. Somebody I've worked with and studied with for years. So even though I'm a Zen priest, I see myself as a Zen student more. much more than a priest. I'm still trying to figure out what a priest is. But I am a Zen student, I know that. Great, Tom.
Hey, Tom, thanks for a rich talk. Sometimes I sit here in silence because I'm digesting so much great information. But I really appreciate the way you contrasted Bhakti and Zen through that lens of faith, doubt, and determination. Can you say a little bit more about determination? Because, when you said Zen, in Zen meditation, it involves no agenda or goal or belief that something extraordinary should happen. So, other than, okay, just stick at it for several years and see what happens. What does determination look like in Zen and maybe even in Bhakti?
Great question, Tom. Well, part of it is the Eightfold Path and sort of this prescription, this recipe for living that the Buddha laid out. In my experience, my life has grown immeasurably better. And it's kind of one of those Zen paradoxes. They seem to like to do this kind of Zen sleight of hand of, saying it's this, and it's not this at the same time. It's the mind of knowing and the mind of not knowing, and it's both and neither. And part of that, I think, is to get us beyond this idea of these fixed ideas, that keeps us in this rigid ideology. So it keeps us in a place of doubt. But to stay there and to keep coming back to it, it takes determination. I mean, you have to want to do this. And even though we're told not to have a gaining idea when we sit, the fact of the matter is we sit because it does good things for us. It's almost like, okay, don't tell anybody what the secret sauce is. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, this does things to your nervous system. It does things to your blood pressure. It rewires your brain. Your brain has this capacity for neuroplasticity, and meditation and practice changes you on a physiological level, as well as on a social level and an emotional level and everything else. So having a belief in that process, because of my experience with it, keeps me coming back. There are a lot of times where I have huge resistance to this practice. There's times that I'm like really happy to sit, particularly if I'm in a place where I'm just like, I need it sometimes. And sometimes I'm dragged kicking and screaming it to it, like a toddler that doesn't want to take a bath. I get this resistance that just doesn't want to do this. And okay, maybe I can't do it today, but I come back to it, because I have faith that I have faith and a willingness. And I guess that's where the determination comes from, is willingness to experience this. And yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, thank you. In fact, your explanation reminds me of hearing a teacher talk about, there's the diagnosis, there is suffering, there's the prescription, the Eightfold Path, but we need to be willing to take the medicine over and over and over, And yeah, you've reminded me that's sort of the lens we can see it through. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. And, there's, and I know this from my recovery work, where it becomes really rich and meaningful and rewarding is when you can turn around and be of service to other people. That's one of the fundamentals of recovery is you recover by helping other people to recover. And that being of service is kind of where practice takes you, and it makes your life richer and more meaningful, even though we're not sitting for any reason. Thanks, Tom.
Well, I guess if there are no further questions, thank you so much, Tom.
Dave?
One quick question.
Yeah, please.
As an amateur poet, I love when Dharma teachers bring in poems to illustrate their points. What was the name of that last poem you shared with Thich Nhat Hanh? Is there a name or a phrase that I could look it up?
Yeah, it's from a book called Zen Keys.
Okay.
And in the back of it, he has a number of koans, and this is number 8.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.